Welcome to Refuting Rationality, the show where I refute the YouTube atheist Rationality Rules. In today's episode, I watched some clickbait. The thumbnail for this episode said, "Atheism is irrational, debunked." But throughout it, he never actually discusses why he thinks atheism is rational. Instead, it's all semantics about the proper definition of atheist, but I've still got some things to say about it. But before we get into that, there's one other video I need to do a quick refutation on.
This is Free Will Debunked.
Good night, everybody.
See? Told you it was quick. Now, of course, that video was longer than that, but it was a little difficult to figure out where I wanted to intercut it. There's really only a couple points I need to make on it. First, and this should be the most obvious, that any argument against free will is self-refuting. If you make an argument against free will, against your will, then by definition, your argument is not rational. You did not reason that you don't have any free will, because you didn't have a choice in the matter. Now, as for the reason he gave for free will not being real, he cites an experiment where brain activity was measured 10 seconds before the action or thought associated with the brain activity. And of course, besides the fact that free will not existing is a self-refuting idea, brain activity does not equal brain causation. I will leave a link in the description to an article that covers 6 more reasons not to blindly accept the results of this experiment as somehow negating free will. But the only point you really need is that no free will is a self-refuting concept. And now we move on to the real video.
What I don't understand is why so many people, the religious and the irreligious alike, have swallowed the idea that atheism is the most rational conclusion to draw about humanity's position and state of grace. Even those who oppose atheism do so in terms of its being too rational, lacking imagination or faith. Just because there's no actual reason to believe in something doesn't mean it can't be there, they say. But atheism isn't the most rational approach. Agnosticism is. You can't know, so it's irrational to say that you do. An atheist or religious observant might counter that agnosticism, saying you don't know if there's a god or gods, isn't a conclusion at all. They'd have a point. But in that case, I say it's irrational to draw a conclusion. We don't know and we can't know.
So to respond, David, you are of course correct when you say that those who assert that they know for a fact that no god or gods exist are being irrational. But here's the thing, that's not what atheism asserts. Atheism is merely the observation that the claims of theism have not met their burden of proof, just as afairism is merely the observation that the claims of fairyism have not met their burden of proof. To put it clearly, theism and atheism address what you believe, while Gnosticism and agnosticism address what you assert to know. And so if I ask you, do you believe in a god, and your answer is no, then you're an atheist. And if your answer is, as is the case with yourself, I don't know, then you haven't answered my question. You either believe or you do not believe. That is, you're either a theist or an atheist. And how certain you are of your belief, that is, how Gnostic or agnostic you are, is a completely different question. And so since you don't believe in a god or gods, you are, just like myself and Dawkins, an atheist. Granted, you're far more agnostic than us, because we regard the existence of a god with the same level of agnosticism as we do the existence of fairies. But make no mistake about it, you are an agnostic atheist, David, and that's why so many identify you as such. Now you might want to counter me by asking, who's to say what the definition of atheism is? Why is the definition that you've just presented more valid than the one that I use? But in response to this, I have 2 answers. The first is that the word theist, which comes from the Greek word theos, literally means God, and the prefix a literally means without. And so the word atheist literally means without God, not there are no gods.
Of course it doesn't mean there are no gods. That would be ridiculous. Ridiculous because that's a full sentence you're trying to cram into a single word. An atheist is a person who is without God. It actually doesn't really say what the person believes. I would say a Muslim is an atheist, because they are without God. The God they do have isn't real, so they really don't have anything, so they are without God. But, obviously, I don't use the word atheist like that in everyday talking, although that is the way I use it in the name of my channel, Refuting Atheists, as opposed to refuting atheism, and atheism is the belief that we are without God. That diagram he made seems pretty good, except that Gnosticism and agnosticism are beliefs, as indicated by the ism at the end of the word. But that diagram implies that they are not beliefs. Agnosticism is the belief that you cannot know. Gnosticism is the belief that you can know. The whole idea that atheism is just a lack of belief is really just a cop-out, and thus it is irrational, because instead of reasoning to a point where they do believe one way or the other, they sit on the fence and hope that somebody reasons it out for them. And of course, saying we don't know and we can't know is irrational and self-refuting, or at least almost self-refuting. I assume he's saying we can't know on this one specific topic, so I can't quite say he's self-refuting just yet. Depends on how much he says we can't know. Also, we don't know and we can't know is a conclusion, and it is an irrational conclusion. But I don't want to focus on David too much. He actually makes some good points later.
And the second, and far more important, is that it stands to reason that the definition of an endorsed label should accurately describe those who identify by it. And since the vast majority of atheists use the definition that I've just presented, this at the very least makes it the definition that critics should address, lest they want to commit a strawman fallacy.
Atheism also requires a leap of faith, albeit a nihilistic one. It might as well be a religion. Many of its adherents evangelize about their philosophy and beliefs as much as the religious do. They claim their opinions to be certainties. They viciously criticize those who believe otherwise. They are, in some cases, emotionally attached to the idea that there's no God and dislike being gainsaid as much as a pope or an ayatollah does.
This, again, is born of your misconception of atheism. The reason that I, for example, so furiously oppose religion actually has very little to do with the fact that I'm an atheist. It's because I recognise that beliefs inform actions, that actions have consequences, and that the consequences of religious beliefs often are deeply and unnecessarily devastating.
That first part of that clip is probably the most rational thing he's ever said. If the majority of atheists want to use that definition, then that's the definition we should address. If for no other reason than just to not sit around arguing semantics all the time. Now, I want you to think about this very carefully. The reason he opposes religion is not because he's an atheist. Think about that. It is absurd. If you were not an atheist, you would be a theist. If you were a theist, you would have a religion. If you had a religion, then you would not be opposed to religion. You might be opposed to certain religions, but of course you didn't say you opposed certain religions. You said you opposed religion. There are two options here. Either you oppose religion because you are an atheist, or you are an atheist because you oppose religion. Either way, your opposition to religion has more than just a little to do with your atheism. Your atheism is fundamental to it. But since being opposed to religion is not fundamental to atheism, because there are atheistic religions, then I would say that atheism is fundamental to your opposition of religion.
As you've pointed out before, New Age nonsense isn't just nonsense, it's dangerous, because if someone tries to heal their child with, say, crystals rather than medicine, then the result has a fair chance of being devastating. But this is also true of religion, and I would argue even more so, because it's shielded by not only the religious, but by otherwise rational and skeptical people like yourself. People have, and continue to, pray for their children's health rather than seek medical help. My point being is that if you replace the word New Age with religion or God, then you've got my position exactly.
They then wrap up this annoyance as anger at the terrible suffering religion has brought to the world, as if they truly think it's the religious beliefs themselves, rather than humanity's inbuilt urges to kill, persecute and suppress, that led to the Crusades, or the Troubles, or the failure to address the AIDS pandemic. Don't they get it? Humans will always find an excuse. The avowedly atheist communist states of the 20th century killed greater numbers than any regimes before or since and needed no religious justification. A politically ideological one served just as well. Humans don't kill or boss each other around or say sex is evil and should be controlled, or that certain people are wicked and should be oppressed, or that certain clothes are inappropriate or compulsory because of their religious beliefs. We do it because some of us want to, and religion is a convenient excuse. Atheists are being incredibly naive if they think that, in the absence of religion, other reasons won't be found for disguising violence as virtue, or indeed that atheist belief systems aren't just as potentially susceptible to murderous extremism as any of the religions they oppose.
Now, I've got to be honest, David, this is by far the most stupid thing I've ever heard you sincerely say. Seriously, I don't know where to start. If this is what you really believe atheism asserts, or at the very least what most atheists think, then it's you who's being incredibly naive. In fact, no, you're being incredibly obtuse. I mean, what atheists have you met in order to muster this outrageous straw man of us, and that the consequences of religious beliefs often are deeply and unnecessarily devastating? Seriously, have you even had a conversation about atheism with a self-described atheist? First and foremost, and as you actually said, the communist regimes of the 20th century were the result of political ideologies, and so why exactly you added the word atheist is baffling. Why didn't you also add the word atheist or a footballer?
Because those would be irrelevant to the topic at hand. He was making the point that theism does not have a monopoly on people committing evil acts.
Sure, the leaders may have been atheist, and their ideologies may have necessitated atheism, but that doesn't mean that these reprehensible regimes were somehow inherent, or a consequence of, a lack of belief in a god, and you're more than smart enough to know this. To make it clear, what you've done here is commit a fallacy of division. You've implicitly asserted that something true of a whole is also true of one of its parts. That because these regimes caused millions of deaths, and because these regimes necessitated atheism, atheism caused millions of deaths. Which is as fallacious as asserting that because Nazi Germany caused millions of deaths, and because Nazi Germany necessitated European and Western Asian heritage, European and Western Asian heritage therefore caused millions of deaths.
Wow. The very fallacy that David was accusing atheists of, although he didn't say the fallacy, is exactly the fallacy Rationality Rules is accusing him of, when he was pointing out the fallacy in atheists. There seems to be a lack of self-awareness or just some massive irony going on with Rationality Rules in this clip.
And secondly, I don't think I've ever met an atheist who's so naive as to believe that without religion, humans would all of a sudden cease extorting, exploiting, and murdering one another. Now don't get me wrong, I'm sure one exists, because the world is full of stupid people, theists and atheists alike. But I know for certain that most atheists wouldn't make such a silly assertion. We're quite aware that with or without religion, good people would be doing good things and bad people would be doing bad things. But we recognise that if you want a good person to do a bad thing, such as oppose equal rights, then religion is a surefire way of achieving it.
This begs the question, how are you defining good and evil? Without God, and by extension religion, there is no way to justify objective morality, and therefore you cannot say whether something is good or evil. Also, it's worth noting that even if it were true that religion would get good people to do evil things, it would also follow that it gets evil people to do good things. But of course, there are no good people. 100% of the people on Earth are wicked. There are no good people doing good things. There are only evil people doing good things. And evil people doing evil things, of course. Also, why would you call people doing evil things good? Atheism is an insult to rationality because it arbitrarily comes up with arguments like this.